Right Network. Mobilizing, countering the left, energizing the right. New Right Network, home of the New Right movement.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to New Right Network's original series, SmythTV. Your host, Brian Smith, giving you all the breaking news of the day, wrapping it all up, making sense of it all, exposing the fake news, and giving you the real news every single night, Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And right after the show is the Wayne Dupree Show, so you've got 2 hours of packed information, back to back. Real news, real information, exposing all the fake news, the Democrats' propaganda and trickery every single day, Monday through Friday. And down in the description below is a link to Wayne's show. So right after this is over, you can jump over and watch Wayne Dupree's show. And also down in the description below, you'll find a bunch of different links. There'll be links for iHeartRadio if you want to listen to the show audio only. You can also find the app Telegram. And man, I didn't realize how popular Telegram is, but a lot of people are jumping into Telegram and jumping into our private group, and I welcome every single one of you. A lot of people are texting me or getting back to me and saying, man, I'm all shadow banned. How do I find your show? Download the app Telegram, and down in the description, it's down there, and also hit the link. That'll take you right into our group. There'll be no messages and nobody can exchange with anybody, but we will drop the link to the show when it goes live. You'll also receive the show note link as well as the Facebooks, the YouTubes, and the other links that you'll need. And if you're a Patreon, you can watch the show early and be a part of that. Thank you very much for the Patreons we have. We could not produce this show. It could not be possible without your contribution over there at Patreon. And again, Smyth.tv. Just jump over there, crush the Patreon button. I thank you very, very much for all of that. In this critical time of fake news, this is how we get the real news out. And it's because of you Patreons that we're able to do this. So absolutely consider jumping over there. And I thank you very much for those of you who are. And if you're over on Parler, we're on Parler as well. So we can link up on Parler down there in the description. And underneath that is the full show notes link. The link to the full show notes takes you over to newrightnetwork.com. And in the article is the embed of the show. So you can literally share the link, show notes link, with your friends and your family, and they will get the full show notes as well as the actual video of the show. And you're going to want to need the show notes other than today. Today's a little bit different. I got a little bit something special for you today. But on a normal day, about 99.9% of the time, in the show notes is the links to all the patriots that have helped to create the show together, as well as tweeting out the great articles and great information, and some of the commentary as well that goes along with those articles, and the links to the articles that we reference so that you can read the full article itself. I'm surprised. I run across a lot of people, some older, some younger, who have never heard of Breitbart News, never heard of Gateway Pundit, never heard of maybe Daily Caller because Tucker Carlson was involved with that a little bit. But a lot of these that we showcase here, Conservative Treehouse, just all of them, townhall.com, and a lot of them haven't heard about that. And then we'll talk about Prager University. And it's in the show notes so that you can click on the link and you can start to frequent places that have real, absolute news. Now, with that being said, the show's a little bit different today, and it's because of the Mueller testimony this morning. I sat there and watched all 4 hours. I watched all 4 hours, and some of you watched it with me, so thanks for trudging along and getting through that. It was brutal. Brutal because the Republicans would state fact, not fiction, state fact about exactly what happened, reference the Mueller report, reference Attorney General Barr, reference all the information that we know at Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, Christopher Steele, Hillary Clinton campaign, Weissman on the board with with Mueller and all of it that we know to be an absolute fact. And then when it would flip over and switch over to where a Democrat would speak, they went back and forth 5 minutes apiece. The Republican spoke, then a Democrat, and back and forth. When the Democrat got a chance to speak, it was nothing but conjecture and lamenting and lambasting and name calling. And there was no substance to it whatsoever, attempting to try and paint this president as a liar, as a cheater. Nobody's above the law. Again and again and again, nobody's above the law. And so that was the main thing from the Democrats. And it was just, I'm telling you, one-sided beat down on Mueller. People in the scope were sad. They were like, oh, man, I feel bad for this guy. Man, this is rough. He's not looking good. He's shaky. He's nervous. His voice is cracking. He's forgetting. He's like literally forgetting what people say to him. He can't hear people. Things just not going very good for Robert Mueller at this point in time. And maybe they chose him because of his age and knew that he'd get some sympathy or something. I don't know. Anyways, with that being said, let's jump into it. I've cut up all 4 hours and I've crunched it down to 45, 50 minutes all the way down and took the clips from the Republicans. There are no Democrat clips in this. And for you trolls might be like, oh, you're biased, Brian. No, I want you to see exactly the lawyers involved, and when I say lawyers, I mean the elected officials that are former lawyers, explaining to Robert Mueller, referencing his own report, and just laying out the case of what he did and how egregious it was that he did. It's not biased. They're using fact, not fiction. Everything the Democrats were saying was all fiction, all conjecture, all name calling. It was complete polar opposites. And I picked out the parts that were absolute factual in the Republicans today. So check out our representatives doing a phenomenal job up there on Capitol. Good morning,
Director. If you'll let me quickly summarize your opening statement this morning. You said in Volume 1 on the issue of conspiracy, the special counsel determined that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. And then in Volume 2, for reasons that you explained, the special counsel did not make a determination on whether there was an obstruction of justice crime committed by the president. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
All right. Now, in explaining that special counsel did not make what you called a traditional prosecution or declination decision, the report on the bottom of page 2 of Volume 2 reads as follows. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Now, I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, your report, and today you said at all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Can you let me make it easier?
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him, because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it, including sitting presidents. And because there is a presumption of innocence, prosecutors never, ever need to conclusively determine it. Now, Director, the special counsel applied this inverted burden of proof that I can't find and you said doesn't exist anywhere in the department policies, and you used it to write a report. And the very first line of your report, says, and as you read this morning, it authorizes the special counsel to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by the special counsel. That's the very first word of your report, right?
That's correct.
Here's the problem, Director. The special counsel didn't do that. On volume 1, you did. On volume 2, with respect to potential obstruction of justice, the special counsel made neither a prosecution decision or a declination decision. You made no decision. You told us this morning and in your report that you made no determination. So respectfully, Director, you didn't follow the special counsel regulations. It clearly says, write a confidential report about decisions reached. Nowhere in here does it say, write a report about decisions that weren't reached. You wrote 180 pages. 180 pages about decisions that weren't reached, about potential crimes that weren't charged or decided. And respectfully, by doing that, you managed to violate every principle and the most sacred of traditions about prosecutors not offering extra prosecutorial analysis about potential crimes that aren't charged. So Americans need to know this as they listen to the Democrats and socialists on the other side of the aisle, as they do dramatic readings from this report, that volume 2 of this report was not authorized under the law to be written. It was written to a legal standard that does not exist at the Justice Department. And it was written in violation of every DOJ principle about extra prosecutorial commentary. I agree with the chairman this morning when he said Donald Trump is not above the law. He's not. But he damn sure shouldn't be below the law, which is where volume 2 of this report puts him.
Thank you, sir.
In your press conference, you stated any testimony from your office would not go beyond our report. We chose these words carefully. The work speaks for itself. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress. Do you stand by that statement?
Yes.
Since closing the special counsel's office in May of 2019, have you conducted any additional interviews or obtained any new information in your role as special counsel?
In the wake of the report?
Since the closing of the office in May of 2019.
And the question was,
have you conducted any new interviews and any new witnesses,
no.
anything? And you can confirm you're no longer special counsel, correct?
I am no longer special counsel.
At any time with the investigation, was your investigation curtailed or stopped or hindered?
No.
Were you or your team provided any questions by members of Congress of the majority ahead of your hearing today?
No.
Your report states that your investigative team included 19 lawyers and approximately 40 FBI agents and analysts and accountants. Are those numbers accurate?
Could you repeat that, please?
40 FBI agents, 19 lawyers, intelligence analysts, and forensic accountants. Are those numbers accurate? This was included in your report.
Generally, yes.
Is it also true that you issued over 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records, and 50 pen registers?
That went a little fast for me.
Okay. In your report, I'll make this very simple. You did a lot of work, correct?
Yes, that I agree.
A lot of subpoenas, a lot of pen registers.
A lot of subpoenas. Yes.
Okay, we'll walk this really slow if we need to.
A lot of search warrants.
All right, a lot of search warrants, a lot of things. So you're very thorough.
The what?
In your opinion, very thorough. You listed this out in your report, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Is it true the evidence gathered during your investigation, given the questions that you have just answered, is it true the evidence gathered during your investigation did not establish that the president was involved in the underlying crime related to Russian election interference as stated in volume 1, page 7?
We found insufficient evidence of the president's culpability.
So that would be a yes.
Pardon?
That would be a yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Isn't it true the evidence did not establish that the president or those close to him were involved in the charged Russian computer hacking or active measure conspiracies, or that the president otherwise had unlawful relationships with any Russian official? Volume 2, page 76, correct?
I leave the answer to our report.
So as a yes. Is that any true your investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with Russian government in the election interference activity? Volume 1, page 2, volume 1, page 173.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Collusion is not a specific offense or a term of art in the federal criminal law. Conspiracy is.
Yes.
In the colloquial context, known public context. Collusion and conspiracy are essentially synonymous terms, correct?
No.
If no, on page 180 of volume 1 of your report, you wrote, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in the General Federal Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. You said at your May 29th press conference and here today, you choose your words carefully. Are you sitting here today testifying something different than what your report states? You stated that you would stay within the report. I just stated your report back to you. And you said that collusion and conspiracy were not synonymous terms. That was your answer, was no.
That's correct.
In that, page 180 of volume 1 of your report, it says, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in General Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. Now, you said you chose your words carefully. Are you contradicting your report right now?
Not when I read it.
So you would change your answer to yes then?
No. If you look at the language.
I'm reading your report, sir. It's a yes or no answer.
Page 180.
Page 180, volume 1.
Okay.
This was from your report.
Correct. And I'll leave it with the report.
So the report says, yes, they are synonymous.
Yes.
Hopefully, for finally, out of your own report, we can put to bed the collusion and conspiracy.
My time is limited. Sure, you can indict other people, but you can't indict the sitting president, right?
That's true.
Okay. You know, let me switch gears. Mr. Shabbat and I were on this committee during the Clinton impeachment. Now, while I recognize that the independent counsel statute under which Kenneth Starr operated is different from the special counsel statute, he, in a number of occasions in his report, stated that the President Clinton's actions may have risen to impeachable conduct, recognizing that it is up to the House of Representatives to determine what conduct is impeachable. You never use the term raising to impeachable conduct for any of the 10 instances that the gentlewoman from Texas did. Is it true that there's nothing in volume 2 of the report that says that the president may have engaged in impeachable conduct?
Well, we have studiously.
And I go back to what Mr. Radcliffe said, and that is that even the president is innocent until proven guilty. My time is up.
The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you. Director Mueller, my Democratic colleagues were very disappointed in your report. They were expecting you to say something along the lines of, here's why President Trump deserves to be impeached, much as Ken Starr did relative to President Clinton back about 20 years ago. Well, you didn't. So their strategy had to change. Now they allege that there's plenty of evidence in your report to impeach the president, but the American people just didn't read it. And this hearing today is their last best hope to build up some sort of groundswell across America to impeach President Trump. That's what this is really all about today. Now, a few questions. On page 103 of volume 2 of your report, when discussing the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, you reference, quote, the firm that produced the Steele reporting, unquote. The name of that firm was Fusion GPS. Is that correct? Well, let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question, right? It was Fusion GPS. Now, Fusion GPS produced the opposition research document widely known as the Steele dossier. And the owner of Fusion GPA was someone named Glenn Simpson. Are you familiar with?
This is outside my purview.
Okay. Glenn Simpson was never mentioned in the 448-page Mueller report, was he?
Well, as I say, it's outside my purview, and it's being handled in the department by others.
Okay. Well, he was not. 448 pages. The owner of Fusion GPS that did the Steele dossier, that started all this, he's not mentioned in there. Let me move on. At the same time, Fusion GPS was working to collect opposition research on Donald Trump from foreign sources on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. It also was representing a Russian-based company, Prevazon, which had been sanctioned by the U.S. government. Are you aware of that?
It's outside my purview.
Okay, thank you. One of the key players I'll go to something different. One of the key players in the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting was Natalia Wisniewska, who you described in your report as a Russian attorney who advocated for the repeal of the Magnitsky Act. Wisniewska had been working with none other than Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS since at least early 2014. Are you aware of that?
Outside my purview.
Thank you. But you didn't mention that or her connections to Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS in your report at all. Let me move on. Now, NBC News has reported the following, quote, Russian lawyer Natalia Wisniewska says she first received the supposedly incriminating information she brought to Trump Tower describing alleged tax evasion and donation to Democrats from none other than Glenn Simpson, the Fusion GPS owner. You didn't include that in the report, and I assume you're saying that was
the matter being handled by others at the Department of Justice.
Okay, thank you. Now, your report spends 14 pages discussing the June 9th, 2016 Trump Tower meeting. It would be fair to say, would it not, that you spent significant resources investigating that meeting?
Well, I refer you to the report.
Okay, and President Trump wasn't at the meeting?
No,
You're aware
he was
of
not.
that? Thank you. Now, in stark contrast to the actions of the Trump campaign, we know that the Clinton campaign did pay Fusion GPS to gather dirt on the Trump campaign from persons associated with foreign governments. But your report doesn't mention a thing about Fusion GPS in it, and you didn't investigate Fusion GPS's connections to Russia. So let me just ask you this. Can you see that from neglecting to mention Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS's involvement with the Clinton campaign, to focusing on a brief meeting at the Trump Tower that produced nothing, to ignoring the Clinton campaign's own ties to Fusion GPS, why some view your report as a pretty one-sided attack on the president?
Well, I tell you, it is still outside my purview.
All right. And I would just note finally that I guess it's just by chance, by coincidence, that the things left out of the report tended to be favorable to the president. My time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, well, first, let me ask a unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to submit this article, Robert Mueller Unmasked, for the record.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. Mueller, who wrote the 9-minute comments you read at your May 29th press conference?
I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, so that's what I thought. You didn't write it. A 2013 puff piece in the Washingtonian about Comey said basically when Comey called, you drop everything you were doing. It gave examples. You're having dinner with your wife and daughter. Comey calls, you drop everything and go. The article quoted Comey as saying, if a train were coming down the track, and I quote, at least Bob Mueller will be standing on the tracks with me. Yeah. You and James Comey have been good friends or were good friends for many years, correct?
No, we were business associates. We both started off in the Justice Department about this
You were good
time.
friends. You can work together and not be friends, but you and Comey were friends.
We were friends.
That's my question. Thank you for getting to the answer. Now, before you were appointed as special counsel, had you talked to James Comey in the preceding 6 months?
No.
When you were appointed as special counsel, was President Trump's firing of Comey something you anticipated investigating, potentially obstruction of justice?
I'm not going to get into that. That's internal deliberations in the Justice Department.
Actually, it goes to your credibility, and maybe you've been away from the courtroom for a while. Credibility is always relevant. It's always material, and that goes for you, too. You're a witness before us. Let me ask you, when you talked to President Trump the day before he appointed you, or you were appointed as special counsel, you were talking to him about the FBI director position again. Did he mention the firing of James Comey?
Not as a candidate. I was asked.
Did he mention the firing of James Comey in your discussion with him?
Cannot remember.
Pardon?
Cannot remember. Don't believe so, but I'm not going to be specific.
You don't remember. But if he did, you could have been a fact witness as to the president's comments and state of mind on firing James Comey.
I suppose that's possible.
Yeah. So most prosecutors want to make sure there's no appearance of impropriety. But in your case, you hired a bunch of people that did not like the president. Let me ask you, when did you first learn of Peter Strzok's animus toward Donald Trump?
In the summer of 2017.
You didn't know before he was hired?
I'm sorry? What did you?
You didn't know before he was hired for your team?
Know what?
Peter Strzok hated Trump.
Okay.
You didn't know that before he was made part of your team. Is that what you're saying?
I did not know that.
All right. When did you first learn?
When he did find out, I acted swiftly to have him reassigned elsewhere in the FBI.
Well, there's some discussion about how swift that was. But when did you learn of the ongoing affair he was having with Lisa Page?
About the same time I learned from Strzok.
Did you ever order anybody to investigate the deletion of all of their texts off of their government phones?
Once we found that Peter Strzok was an author of...
Did you ever...
May I finish?
Well, you're not answering my question. Did you order an investigation into deletion and reformatting of their government phones?
No, there was an IG investigation ongoing.
Well, listen, regarding collusion or conspiracy, you didn't find evidence of any agreement, I'm quoting you, among the Trump campaign officials and any Russia-linked individuals to interfere with our U.S. election, correct?
Correct.
So you also note in the report that an element of any of those obstructions you referenced requires a corrupt state of mind, correct?
Corrupt intent, correct.
Right. And if somebody knows they did not conspire with anybody from Russia to affect the election, and they see the big Justice Department with people that hate that person coming after them, and then a special counsel appointed who hires dozen or more people that hate that person, and he knows he's innocent, he's not corruptly acting in order to see that justice is done. What he's doing is not obstructing justice. He is pursuing justice. And the fact that you ran it out 2 years means you perpetuated injustice.
I take your question.
Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I take your question.
Importantly, the president never said fire Mueller or in the investigation, and one doesn't necessitate the other. And McGahn, in fact, did not resign. He stuck around for a year and a half.
Director, the FBI interviewed Joseph Mifsud on February 10th, 2017. In that interview, Mr. Mifsud lied. You point this out on page 193, volume 1. Mifsud denied. Mifsud also falsely stated. In addition, Mifsud omitted. 3 times he lied to the FBI, yet you didn't charge him with the crime.
Excuse me, did you say one? I'm sorry, did you say 193?
Volume 1, 193. He lied 3 times. You pointed out in the report. Why didn't you charge him with the crime?
I can't get into internal deliberations with regard who would or would not be.
Charge a lot of other people for making false statements. Let's remember this. In 2016, the FBI did something they probably haven't done before. They spied on 2 American citizens associated with a presidential campaign, George Papadopoulos and Carter Page. With Carter Page, they went to the FISA court. They used the now famous dossier as part of the reason they were able to get the warrant and spy on Carter Page for a better part of a year. With Mr. Papadopoulos, they didn't go to the court. They used human sources. All kinds of, from about the moment Papadopoulos joins the Trump campaign, you got all these people all around the world starting to swirl around him. Names like Halper, Downer, Mifsud, Thompson, meeting in Rome, London, all kinds of places. The FBI even sent a lady posing as somebody else, went by the name Azra Turk, even dispatched her to London to spy on Mr. Papadopoulos. In one of these meetings, Mr. Papadopoulos is talking to a foreign diplomat, and he tells the diplomat, Russians have dirt on Clinton. That diplomat then contacts the FBI, and the FBI opens an investigation based on that fact. You point this out on page 1 of the report. July 31st, 2016, they open the investigation based on that piece of information. What I'm wondering is, who told Papadopoulos? How'd he find out?
I can't get into the evidentiary filing.
Yes, you can, because you wrote about it. You gave us the answer. Page 192 of the report, you tell us who told him. Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud's a guy who told Papadopoulos. The mysterious professor who lives in Rome and London, teaches in 2 different universities. This is the guy who told Papadopoulos. He's the guy who starts it all. And when the FBI interviews him, he lies 3 times, and yet you don't charge him with a crime. You charge Rick Gates for false statements. You charge Paul Manafort for false statements. You charge Michael Cohen with false statements. You charge Michael Flynn, a 3-star general, with false statements. But the guy who puts the country through this whole saga, starts it all for 3 years we've lived this now, he lies, and you guys don't charge him. And I'm curious as to why. When the special counsel's office interviewed Mifsud, did he lie to you guys too?
Can't get into that.
Did you interview Mifsud?
Can't get into that.
Is Mifsud Western intelligence or Russian intelligence?
Can't get into that.
A lot of things you can't get into. What's interesting, you can charge 13 Russians no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen, no one's ever going to hear of them, no one's ever going to see them. You can charge them. You can charge all kinds of people who are around the president with false statements. But the guy who launches the guy who puts this whole story in motion, you can't charge him. I think that's amazing.
I'm not certain I agree with your characterizations.
Well, I'm reading from your report. Mifsud told Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos tells the diplomat tells the FBI opens the investigation July 31st, 2016, and here we are 3 years later, July of 2019, the country's been put through this, and the central figure who launches it all lies to us, and you guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with a crime. Now, here's the good news. Here's the good news. The president was falsely accused of conspiracy. The FBI does a 10-month investigation, and James Comey, when we deposed him a year ago, told us at that point they had nothing. You do a 22-month investigation. At the end of that 22 months, you find no conspiracy. And what's the Democrats want to do? They want to keep investigating. They want to keep going. Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr's doing.
The gentleman from Florida.
Director Mueller, can you state with confidence that the Steele dossier was not part of Russia's disinformation campaign?
No, as I said in my opening statement, that part of the building of the case predated me, and by at least 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Manafort's alleged crimes regarding tax evasion predated you. You had no problem charging them. And matter of fact, this Steele dossier predated the Attorney General, and he didn't have any problem answering the question. When Senator Cornyn asked the Attorney General the exact question I asked you, Director, the Attorney General said, and I'm quoting, "No, I can't state that with confidence." And that's one of the areas I'm reviewing. I'm concerned about it, and I don't think it's entirely speculative. Now, if something is not entirely speculative, then it must have some factual basis, but you identify no factual basis regarding the dossier or the possibility that it was part of the Russia disinformation campaign. Now, Christopher Steele's reporting is referenced in your report. Steele reported to the FBI that senior Russian foreign ministry figures, along with other Russians, told him that there was, and I'm quoting from the Steele dossier, extensive evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign team and the Kremlin. So here's my question. Did Russians really tell that to Christopher Steele, or did he just make it all up, and was he lying to the FBI?
Let me back up a second, if I could, and say, as I said earlier, with regard to the Steele, that's beyond my purview.
No, it is exactly your purview, Director Mueller, and here's why. only one of two things is possible, right? Either Steele made this whole thing up and there were never any Russians telling him of this vast criminal conspiracy that you didn't find, or Russians lied to Steele. Now, if Russians were lying to Steele to undermine our confidence in our duly elected president, that would seem to be precisely your purview, because you stated in your opening that the organizing principle was to fully and thoroughly investigate Russia's interference. But you weren't interested in whether or not Russians were interfering through Christopher Steele. And if Steele was lying, then you should have charged him with lying like you charged a variety of other people, but you say nothing about this in your report.
Well, sir.
Meanwhile, Director, you're quite loquacious on other topics. You write 3,500 words about the June 9 meeting between the Trump campaign and Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya. You write on page 103 of your report that the president's legal team suggested, and I'm quoting from your report, that the meeting might have been a setup by individuals working with the firm that produced the Steele reporting. So I'm going to ask you a very easy question, Director Mueller. On the week of June 9, who did Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya meet with more frequently? The Trump campaign or Glenn Simpson, who was functionally acting as an operative for the Democratic National Committee?
Well, what I think is missing here is the fact that this is under investigation elsewhere in the Justice Department. And if I can finish, sir, and consequently, it's not within my purview. Department of Justice and FBI should be responsive to questions on this particular issue.
It is absurd to suggest that a operative for the Democrats was meeting with this Russian lawyer the day before and the day after the Trump Tower meeting, and yet that's not something you referenced. Now, Glenn Simpson testified under oath. He had dinner with Veselnitskaya the day before and the day after this meeting with the Trump team. Do you have any basis, as you sit here today, to believe that Steele was lying?
As I said before, and I'll say again, it's not my purview. Others are investigating what you
So it's not your purview to look into whether or not Steele's lying. It's not your purview to look into whether or not anti-Trump Russians are lying to Steele. And it's not your purview to look at whether or not Glenn Simpson was meeting with the Russians the day before and the day after you write 3,500 words about the Trump campaign meeting. So I'm wondering how these decisions are guided. I look at the Inspector General's report. I'm citing from page 404 of the Inspector General's report. It states, Page stated, Trump's not ever going to be president, right? Right. Strzok replied, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Also in the Inspector General's report, there's someone identified as attorney number two. Attorney number two, this is page 419, replied, hell no, and then added, viva la resistance. Attorney number two in the Inspector General's report and Strzok both worked on your team, didn't they?
And the question was?
Did he work for you? The guy who said viva la resistance?
Peter Strzok worked for me for a period of time, yes.
Yeah, but so did the other guy that said viva la resistance. And here's what I'm kind of noticing, Director Mueller. When people associated with Trump lied, you threw the book at him. When Christopher Steele lied, nothing. And so it seems to be that when Glenn Simpson met with Russians, nothing. When the Trump campaign met with Russians, 3,500 words. And maybe the reason why there are this discrepancies in what you focused on is because the team was so biased.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Pledged to stop Trump.
Hi. I want to start by thanking you for your service. You joined the Marines and led a rifle platoon in Vietnam, where you earned a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and other commendations. You served as an assistant United States attorney leading the homicide unit here in D.C., U.S. attorney for the District of Massachusetts and later Northern District of California, assistant attorney general for DOJ's criminal division, and the FBI director. So thank you. I appreciate that. But having reviewed your biography, it puzzles me why you handled your duties in this case the way you did. The report contradicts what you taught young attorneys at the Department of Justice, including to ensure that every defendant is treated fairly, or as Justice Sutherland said in the Berger case, a prosecutor is not the representative of an ordinary party to a controversy, but of a sovereignty, whose interest in a criminal prosecution is not that it shall win a case, but that justice shall be done, and that the prosecutor may strike hard blows, but he is not at liberty to strike foul ones. By listing the 10 factual situations and not reaching a conclusion about the merits of the case, you unfairly shifted the burden of proof to the president, forcing him to prove his innocence while denying him a legal forum to do so. And I've never heard of a prosecutor declining a case and then holding a press conference to talk about the defendant. You noted 8 times in your report that you had a legal duty under the regulations to either prosecute or decline charges. Despite this, you disregarded that duty. As a former prosecutor, I'm also troubled with your legal analysis. You discussed 10 separate factual patterns involving alleged obstruction, and then you failed to separately apply the elements of the applicable statutes. When I look at those concerning the Flynn matter, 1503 is inapplicable because there wasn't a grand jury or trial jury impaneled, and Director Comey was not an officer of the court as defined by the statute. Section 1505 criminalizes acts that would obstruct or impede administrative proceedings as those before Congress or an administrative agency. The Department of Justice Criminal Resource Manual states that the FBI investigation is not a pending proceeding. 1512b3 talks about intimidation, threats of force to tamper with a witness. General Flynn at the time was not a witness, and certainly Director Comey was not a witness. And 1512c2 talks about tampering with a record. And as Joe Biden described the statute as being debated on the Senate floor, he called this a statute criminalizing document shredding, and there's nothing in your report that alleges that the president destroyed any evidence. So what I have to ask you, and what I think people are working around in this hearing is, let me lay a little foundation for it. The ethical rules require that a prosecutor have a reasonable probability of conviction to bring a charge. Is that correct?
Sounds generally accurate.
Okay. And the regulations concerning your job as special counsel state that your job is to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by your office. You recommended declining prosecution of President Trump and anyone associated with his campaign because there was insufficient evidence to convict for a charge of conspiracy with Russian interference in the 2016 election. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Was there sufficient evidence to convict President Trump or anyone else with obstruction of justice?
We did not make that calculation.
How could you not have made the calculation with the regulation?
The OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel, indicates that we cannot indict a sitting president. So one of the tools that a prosecutor would use is not there.
Okay, but let me just stop. You made the decision on the Russian interference. You couldn't have indicted the president on that, and you made the decision on that. But when it came to obstruction, you threw a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see what would stick. Well, you believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
Ethically, under the ethical standards.
Well,
you guys, your team wrote in the report, quote, this is the top of page 2, volume 1, also on page 173, by the way. You said that you'd come to the conclusion that, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, close quote. That's an accurate statement, right?
That's accurate.
And you will come to a conclusion, there's no there for this defendant. Isn't that right? So apparently
I can't speak
you can't say when.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just recently, Mr. Mueller, you said Mr. Liu was asking you questions. And Mr. Liu's question, I quote, the reason you didn't indict the president is because of the OLC opinion. And you answered, that is correct. But that is not what you said in the report, and it's not what you told Attorney General Barr. And in fact, in a joint statement that you released with DOJ on May 29th, after your press conference, your office issued a joint statement with the Department of Justice that said, the Attorney General has previously stated that the special counsel repeatedly affirmed that he was not saying that but for the OLC opinion, he would have found the president obstructed justice. There's been a lot of talk today about firing the special counsel and curtailing the investigation. Were you ever fired, Mr. Mueller, from special? Were you ever fired as special counsel, Mr. Mueller?
No.
No. Were you allowed to complete your investigation unencumbered?
Yes.
And in fact, you resigned as special counsel when you closed up the office in late May 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Mueller, rather than purely relying on the evidence provided by witnesses and documents, I think you relied a lot on media. I'd like to know how many times you cited the Washington Post in your report.
I do not have knowledge of that figure, but that's it. I don't have knowledge of that figure.
I counted about 60 times. How many times did you cite the New York Times? I counted.
Again, I have no idea.
I counted about 75 times. How many times did you cite Fox News? about 25 times. I've got to say, it looks like volume 2 is mostly regurgitated press stories. Honestly, there's almost nothing in volume 2 that I couldn't already hear or know simply by having a $50 cable news subscription. However, your investigation cost the American taxpayers $25 million. Mr. Mueller, you cited media reports nearly 200 times in your report. Then in a footnote, a small footnote, number 7, page 15 of volume 2 of your report, you wrote, I quote, "This section summarizes and cites various news stories not for the truth of the information contained in the stories, but rather to place candidate Trump's response to those stories in context. Since nobody but lawyers reads footnotes, are you concerned that the American public took the embedded news stories?"
Time of the gentlelady is expired. The gentlelady from Washington.
Can Mr. Mueller answer the question?
No, we're running short on time.
Despite the expectations that your report would be released to the public, you left out significant exculpatory evidence. In other words, evidence favorable to the president, correct? Mr. Mueller, as a former officer in the United States JAG Corps, I prosecuted nearly 100 terrorists in a Baghdad courtroom. I cross-examined the butcher of Fallujah in defense of our Navy SEALs. As a civilian, I was elected a magisterial district judge in Pennsylvania, so I'm very well versed in the American legal system. The drafting and the publication of some of the information in this report without an indictment, without prosecution, frankly flies in the face of American justice. And I find those facts, this entire process, un-American.
Mr. Mueller, did you indeed interview for the FBI director job one day before you were appointed as special counsel?
My understanding, I was not applying for the job. I was asked to give my input on what it would take to do the job, which triggered the interview you're talking about.
So you don't recall on May 16th, 2017, that you interviewed with the president regarding the FBI director job?
I interviewed with the president, and
regarding the FBI director job?
It was about the job and not about me applying for the job.
So your statement here today is that you didn't interview to apply for the FBI director job?
That's correct.
So did you tell the vice president that the FBI director position would be the one job that you would come back for?
Don't recall that one.
You don't recall that?
No.
You mentioned the unverified allegations. How long did it take you to reach the conclusion that it was unverified?
I'm not going to speak to that.
It's actually in your report multiple times that it's unverified, and you're telling me that you're not willing to tell us how you came to the conclusion that it was unverified.
True.
When did you become aware that the unverified Steele dossier was included in the FISA application to spy on Carter Page?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Your team interviewed Christopher Steele, is that correct?
Not going to get into that.
You can't tell this committee as to whether or not you interviewed Christopher Steele in a 22-month investigation with 18 lawyers.
As I said at the outset, that is one of the investigations that is being handled by others in the Department of Justice.
Yeah, but you're here testifying about this investigation today. And you had 2 years to investigate. Not once did you consider it worthy to investigate how an unverified document that was paid for by a political opponent was used to obtain a warrant to spy on the opposition political campaign. Did you do any investigation in that whatsoever?
I do not accept your characterization of what occurred.
What would be your characterization?
I'm not going to speak any more to it.
So you can't speak any more to it, but you're not going to agree with my characterization. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm not going to answer that.
So you're not going to respond to any of the questions regarding Christopher Steele or your interviews with them?
Well, as I said at the outset this morning, that was one of the investigations that I could not speak to.
Well, I don't understand how, if you interviewed an individual on the purview of this investigation that you're testifying to us today, that you've closed that investigation, how that's not within your purview to tell us about that investigation and who you interviewed.
I have nothing to add.
Can't the president fire the FBI director at any time without reason under Article 1 of the Constitution?
Yes.
Article 2?
Yes.
That's correct. Can't he also fire you as special counsel at any time without any reason?
I believe that to be the case.
Mr. Mueller, how many people did you fire? How many people on your staff did you fire during the course of the investigation?
How many people
did you fire?
I'm not going to discuss that.
You fired, according to the Inspector General's report, attorney number 2 was let go, and we know Peter Strzok was let go, correct?
Yes, and there may have been other persons on other issues that have been either transferred or fired.
Peter Strzok testified before this committee on July 12, 2018, that he was fired because you were concerned about preserving the appearance of independence. Do you agree with this testimony?
Say that again, if you could.
That he said he was fired at least partially because you were worried about concerned about preserving the appearance of independence with the special counsel's investigation. Do you agree with that statement?
The statement was by whom?
Peter Strzok at this hearing.
And I am not familiar with that.
Did you fire him because you were worried about the appearance of independence of the investigation?
No, he was transferred as a result of instances involving texts.
Do you agree that your office did not only have an obligation to operate with independence, but to operate with the appearance of independence as well?
Absolutely. We strove to do that over the 2 years.
Andrew Weissman.
Part of that was making certain that.
Andrew Weissman's one of your top attorneys?
Yes.
Did Weissman have a role in selecting other members of your team?
He had some role, but not a major role.
Andrew Weissman attended Hillary Clinton's election night party. Did you know that before or after he came onto the team?
Don't know when I found that out.
Okay. On January 30th, 2017, Weissman wrote an email to Deputy Attorney General Yates stating, "I am so proud and in awe," regarding her disobeying a direct order from the president. Did Weissman disclose that email to you before he joined the team?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that.
Is that not a conflict of interest?
I'm not going to talk about that.
Are you aware that Ms. Jeannie Rhee represented Hillary Clinton in litigation regarding personal emails originating from Clinton's time as Secretary of State?
Yes.
Did you know that before she came on the team?
No.
Aaron Zelbley, the guy sitting next to you, represented Justin Cooper, a Clinton aide who destroyed one of Clinton's mobile devices. And you must be aware by now that 6 of your lawyers donated $12,000 directly to Hillary Clinton. I'm not even talking about the $49,000 they donated to other Democrats, just the donations to the opponent who was the target of your investigation.
Can I speak for a second to the hiring practices?
Sure.
We strove to hire those individuals that could do the job. I've been in this business for almost 25 years. And in those 25 years, I have not had a case the capability of the individual to do the job and do the job quickly and seriously and with integrity.
But that's what I'm saying, Mr. Mueller. This isn't just about you being able to vouch for your team. This is about knowing that the day you accepted this role, you had to be aware no matter what this report concluded, half of the country was going to be skeptical of your team's findings. And that's why we have recusal laws that define bias and perceive bias for this very reason. 28 United States Code 528 specifically lists not just political conflict of interest, but the appearance of political conflict of interest. It's just simply not enough that you vouch for your team. The interests of justice demand that no perceived bias exists. I can't imagine a single prosecutor or judge that I have ever appeared in front of would be comfortable with these circumstances where over half of the prosecutorial team had a direct relationship to the opponent of the person being investigated.
Let me one other fact that I put on the table, and that is we hired 19 lawyers over the period of time. Of those 19 lawyers, 14 of them were transferred from elsewhere in the Department of Justice. Only 5 came from outside.
And so half of them had a direct relationship, political or personal, with the opponent of the person you were investigating. And that's my point. I wonder if not a single word in this entire report was changed, but rather the only difference was we switched Hillary Clinton and President Trump. If Peter Strzok had texted those terrible things about Hillary Clinton instead of President Trump, if a team of lawyers worked for, donated thousands of dollars to, and went to Trump's parties instead of Clinton's, I don't think we'd be here trying to prop up an obstruction allegation. My colleagues would have spent the last 4 months accusing your team of being bought and paid for by the Trump campaign, and we couldn't trust a single word of this report. They would still be accusing the president of conspiracy with Russia, and they would be accusing your team of aiding and abetting in that with that conspiracy. And with that, I yield back.
You've been asked a lot of questions here today, and to be frank, you performed as most of us expected. You've stuck closely to your report, and you have declined to answer many of our questions on both sides. As the closer for the Republican side, I know you're glad to get to the close, I want to summarize the highlights of what we have heard and what we know. You spent 2 years and nearly $30 million taxpayer dollars and unlimited resources to prepare a nearly 450-page report, which you described today as very thorough. Millions of Americans today maintain genuine concerns about your work, in large part because of the infamous and widely publicized bias of your investigating team members, which we now know included 14 Democrats and 0 Republicans. Campaign finance reports later showed that team, excuse me, it's my time. That team of Democrat investigators you hired donated more than $60,000 to the Hillary Clinton campaign and other Democratic candidates. Your team also included Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, which have been discussed today, and they had the lurid text messages that confirmed they openly mocked and hated Donald Trump and his supporters, and they vowed to take him out. Mr. Ratcliffe asked you earlier this morning, quote, can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined, unquote? You answered, I cannot. Sir, that is unprecedented. Nothing ever happened to stop or impede your special counsel's investigation. Nobody was fired by the president, nothing was curtailed, and the investigation continued unencumbered for 22 long months. As you finally concluded in Volume 1, the evidence, quote, did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference, unquote. And the evidence, quote, did not establish that the president or those close to him were involved in any Russian conspiracies or had an unlawful relationship with any Russian official, unquote. Over those 22 long months that your investigation dragged along, the president became increasingly frustrated, as many of the American people did, with its effects on our country and his ability to govern. He vented about this to his lawyer and his close associates, and he even shared his frustrations, as we all know, on Twitter. But while the president's social media accounts might have influenced some in the media or the opinion of some of the American people, none of those audiences were targets or witnesses in your investigation. The president never affected anybody's testimony. He never demanded to end the investigation or demanded that you be terminated, and he never misled Congress, the DOJ, or the special counsel. Those, sir, are undisputed facts. There will be a lot of discussion, I predict today, and great frustration throughout the country about the fact that you wouldn't answer any questions here about the origins of this whole charade, which was the infamous Christopher Steele dossier, now proven to be totally bogus, even though it is listed and specifically referenced in your report. But as our hearing is concluding, we apparently will get no comment on that from you. Mr. Mueller, there's one primary reason why you were called here today and by the Democrat majority of our committee. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle just want political cover. They desperately wanted you today to tell them they should impeach the president. But the one thing you have said very clearly today is that your report is complete and thorough, and you completely agree with and stand by its recommendations and all of its content. Is that right?
True.
Mr. Mueller, one last important question. Your report does not recommend impeachment, does it?
I'm not going to talk about recommendations.
It does not conclude that impeachment would be appropriate here,
I'm not
right?
going to talk about that issue.
That's one of the many things you wouldn't talk about today, but I think we can all draw our own conclusions. I do thank you for your service to the country, and I'm glad this charade will come to an end soon, and we can get back to the important business of this committee with its broad jurisdiction of so many important issues for the country.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I did. I went through all 4 hours for you guys all day today to pick out those juicy pieces that just absolutely show, without a shadow of a doubt, that Donald Trump is exonerated, no obstruction, no collusion, no crime, other than the crimes that were absolutely showed the absolute total bias on the Hillary Clinton side. I mean, when the representatives went at Mueller with 14 members on his team out of the 19 angry Democrats, 14 donating a total of $60,000 to the Hillary Clinton campaign. Andrew Weissman, the head of hiring some of these lawyers. Yet the night that Hillary Clinton lost was with her and wept with her. We know that they were dirty. We know that they were crooked. And now our elected officials are in lockstep and in harmony with fact, not fiction, exposing the witch hunt. I don't even have to get into the whole thing. You guys already know. But I wanted to wrap this all up and show you guys that our elected officials are doing their job. We got a crisis on the border that needs to be tended to. Democrats won't do that because they love to divide and conquer. Use any kind of crisis. Don't let a crisis go to waste. Saul Alinsky tactics. That's what you do. You keep going at the citizenry and don't let up. Folks, we are in this together. You and I. 2020 coming up it's right around the corner. 2024, when it's over, it's up to you and me to keep this country great, to keep the information true, to get out the real news. And the only way that is possible is if you become part with us as a Patreon and get the show out. help us help to get the real news out every single night, Monday through Friday. All right, guys, for a weird show, I mean, a little bit different change up, but I really wanted to get this out to you guys for a Wednesday Wisdom. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to New Right Network, mobilizing, countering, energizing. Online at newrightnetwork.com.